So now that we've defined what human language is, a separate question is, fine, other species might not have all of these characteristics in their communication systems, but could they learn human language if we put them, if we train them on it? Now, one wonderful example of such type of experiment is Alex the parrot. And Alex the parrot was trained to produce remarkably linguistic behaviors. There's a wonderful video linked in our textbook. And you can actually hear him vocalize words and answers to questions. And overall, he was trained to use over 200 words. And he really did give the impression of understanding the meaning of fairly abstract words, such as shape and color. He could count to a few numbers. And in fact, Alex is not the only one. There are experiments in dolphins demonstrating the understanding of very abstract words, such as the word under. However, you hopefully remember the video of Skinner demonstrating pigeons who apparently learned to read through instrumental conditioning. And I say this because it's one of the big complications in evaluating this research, is trying to ensure and understand to what degree the learning that is happening is a real association between a type of utterance or a symbol and an idea versus a simple training of associations between certain sounds and certain objects and the presence of a reward. Now, in the context of non-human primates, very initial results were not great, but particularly and probably because they often were based on attempts to use vocalizations for words, just like humans do. However, obviously the apparatus of a chimp in terms of their ability to create sounds is very different because of the position of the larynx. And so once they started using American Sign Language as the means of communication, recognizing that chimps have a lot of dexterity with their hands, then actually it has been demonstrated in a few different instances that chimps can learn a lot of vocabulary. Washoe the chimp, for example, learned up to 250 signs, some of which were very abstract, such as the word more. And also, Washoe exhibited the sort of created novel compound words from individual symbols. So, for example, combined dirty and good to refer to a toilet, combined open food and drink to refer to a refrigerator. And this is one of the examples of just how much other species can learn of human language. For the most part, however, these are successes with respect to teaching vocabulary. At times, very impressive amount of vocabulary, just like in the case of Washoe. However, that is not what is so impressive of human language. In fact, and we're going to discuss this a little bit later, what is probably unique, or what has been said to be unique of human language, is not the vocabulary. We are said to come into this world with machinery in our mind that relates to the generativity and the infinity and the structure dependence of language, not the vocabulary of language. So in the sense, finding that a chimp can learn vocabulary is not particularly striking. The question is, can they understand and create this syntax just like humans do? And this was the question that parents and colleagues were interested in pursuing. So what they did is in 1972, they pretty much grew a chimp called Neem Chimpsky, which is a pun on the name of Noam Chomsky, and I'll explain that in just a second. And they had this chimp raised in a home environment by human surrogate parents and teachers who communicated towards Nim exclusively in American Sign Language, and also communicated among themselves in American Sign Language. In other words, this chimp grew up in an American Sign Language household. Now, the reason for doing this has to do with one of the fundamental hypothesis by Noam Chomsky about how human language is special and how the human mind is specially geared for language. And this is a wonderful quote from a lecture of Noam Chomsky, in which he clearly articulates his stance on the fact that language for humans is an innate skill. It's no different than your ability to learn to see shapes or learn to walk. To Noam Chomsky, language is really no different than any other of your capabilities. You didn't really learn to see shapes or learn to see faces. Your brain just did it for you. Your brain came into this world ready to learn to see faces, to see edges, and to see the visible spectrum of light and not other parts of the electromagnetic spectrum. And so his view is that the same is true for language. Language is not special in any sense. It's just one of many capabilities that you come into this world geared for. And what you come geared for into this world, again, we're going to discuss the details a little bit further down, is this generativity and creativity, the syntactic aspect of language, the combinatorics of language. And so here's Noam Chomsky saying something has to account for the fact that my granddaughter picked out part of her environment as language related and almost reflexively developed a language, while her pet kitten, a chimp or a songbird, exposed to the exact same data, didn't take the first step and couldn't conceivably take the second. So the experiment by Terence and colleagues really goes straight to the heart of the innateness hypothesis. If only we could raise a chimp like a human child, and we're going to give this chimp the exact same environment that a human child would have. So if we give to a chimp the exact same shot at learning language as we would with a human child, is a chimp going to pick up language? So the reason why this chimp was called Neem or Nim Chimpsky was because this was meant to be a disproving of the innateness hypothesis by Noam Chomsky. Now, in their analysis of the data, what transpired was the opposite. So this is just a list of the type of two signs combinatorics that Nim would learn to do. And you can see here ordered by frequency. So play me Nim, tickle me, eat Nim, Nim eat. And see, there is some slight tendency towards preferring certain orders in two symbol sequences. However, actually these turn out to be very weak preferences. For example, he often says eat Nim, but also Nim eat, and wouldn't quite exhibit the type of systematic preference over order that instead human children develop very early in life. When he did 3 symbol strings, many were actually just the addition of a redundant symbol. For example, if you look at the first few, play me Nim, play me, eat me Nim, eat Nim eat. He doesn't seem to be generating more meaning. He's just adding words, particularly such as me, you, and Nim, to a 2-word combination. So he's not really adding to what he's saying. So in the sense, also if you look towards the bottom of the list, the sweet Nim sweet, he's just not expanding the sentences like human children seem to do. So clearly he doesn't seem to be using random words from the semantic point of view. The words are generally appropriate, but definitely nothing close to proto-sentences. His 4-word combinations were even worse. If you look at the first few, eat, drink, eat Nim, banana Nim. He's not really creating sentences. He's just repeating words. Sometimes they are semantically related. Banana, me, eat, banana. But he's not developing more and more complex sentences in the way that human children do. You'll also notice that many times, although at times when he adds a word to or a symbol to a combination, it is semantically appropriate. Many times he's just adding these tokens that would be fine anytime, particularly as I said earlier, you, me, you, me, nim. You can add you, me, nim to any combination, and it would be semantically appropriate. Since he's always interacting with someone else, he's always nim and he's always me. So in a sense, he doesn't seem to be adding content. Oftentimes when he adds symbols, he's still not adding content. He's only adding sort of to the string of symbols that he's using. What is so damning in this case is the comparison of Nim with actual children. And you can compare Nim to either hearing children or hearing impaired children. And what you notice, if you look at their age versus the mean length of their utterances, there's a clear innate and spontaneous tension towards increasing the length of utterances. Children just have a tension towards creating longer and longer utterances, and they do so by using the combinatorics of language. Now, Nim, on the other hand, and I'm going to show him down here. So see, children tend to start between, one point something on average utterances, and they very quickly sort of grow in the average length of their utterances. Nim, on the other hand, started just about at the same point and never spontaneously converged towards using longer utterances. He just remained at the same level. And even when he was capable of doing longer utterances, it was not what he would spontaneously do. He just remained at the same level. And it turns out that there were many other problems with his utterances. For one, careful analysis of his videos showed that many times he would actually just imitate what his teacher would say, or he would interrupt his teacher and use the same sign, which is extremely different from the way in which children use non-imitative language, meaning they tend to create much more. Indeed, for the most part, when children are having an interaction with someone else, they tend to expand on what they hear from the other person. And then they also tend to create all of novel utterances. So maybe the mother or father says something, they tend to say that, but also expand with a semantically appropriate and syntactically appropriate expansion. And then they also often respond with a completely novel type of utterance with respect to what is, the way in which they're being prompted by the parent. Now, Nim, on the other hand, his much more so than children would just tend to repeat what the teacher would say, or would also do what is known as reduction, which means repeat what is being said, but with fewer words. So in a sense, the opposite tension than what children used to do. And as I said earlier, his expansions tend mostly to be done by just adding me, nim, you, and very often hug and eat to other combinations of words. And as I said earlier, these additional symbols, they're just symbols that you could use for anything. So they're not necessarily the context appropriate type of elaboration and expansion that human children tend to do. Also, there were other aspects of Nim's linguistic ability that clearly did not match up with human children. So overall, although you could see, as I said earlier, some tension towards regularities in two symbol combinations, it's also unclear whether he just memorized the certain two symbol combinations and therefore just used them, versus actually using them because he developed a syntactic preference. But as soon as you looked above 2, unlike human children, he just showed no evidence of regularity, of syntactic regularity. And there's one reported a string of, I think, 16 words, and it's just a repetition of individual words, me, nim, eat, banana, banana, eat. Sort of, he never quite exhibited any trait of the syntax of how to string words together, which children instead exhibit fairly early on. As I was saying, his language mostly imitative. He was mostly just imitating and just repeating typically what his teacher had just said. And also, he never quite understood the turn taking that children instead understand fairly early. He would just interrupt, whereas children understand sort of the give and take of a communication. So despite Terrace's intent and initial motivation for doing the study, in the end, they had to admit that this was proof against the idea that just about that other species can learn human language. In fact, in their own words, apes can learn many isolated symbols, and we've seen other species do this. But they show no unequivocal evidence of mastering the conversational, semantic, or syntactic organization of language. Overall, I have to say most researchers today tend to agree that no animal, whether trained or untrained, has ever demonstrated anything close to the language-like sort of productivity and generativity of a human natural language, starting from a finite set of symbols. In this sense, indeed, true language really appears to be human.